From the Empire State to the Golden Gates, this is Quad Radio USA. Now, with all the dirt from the world of ATV motocross and GNCC racing, here's Mr. 10 Seconds, Rodney Tomlin.
And a good afternoon, everyone, as we welcome you out to Quad Radio once again on a Monday, November 19th. And, of course, welcome you out here on a pre-Thanksgiving week. Actually, it's not pre-Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving week, and lots of things to be thankful for. And I think that we're going to realize that, especially from an ATV racing standpoint here in just a few moments when we finished talking with Seth Fargher in this State of the Sport Quad segment of our Quad Radio. And without further ado, we say good afternoon and welcome to one Seth Fargher. Seth, welcome to Quad Radio once again, man. It's becoming a habit, I think, man.
It is, and I'm glad. It's nice to get to start doing this. The one thing I was always afraid I was going to inherit from my dad is the gift of gab, and unfortunately, I think I've got it. But in terms of Quad Radio, it seems to work out. At least I enjoy it, and hopefully some of the listeners do. And it's cool fun doing the sponsorship thing, and it's neat now to kind of shift gears and talk about something a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure, and we've got a lot to talk about, and I know there's an article on ATV.com that people can read that will correlate with this interview, and if you haven't read it yet, you need to do so. It is titled, Where Have All the Sport Quad Gone? There on ATV.com. And Seth, a good read. We'll talk about that in just a second, but right now I do want to say thanks to our friends at Impact Solutions and ImpactSolutionsATV.com for once again helping bring the great support that they bring Quad Radio, and also our friends at SSI Decals, as they have been a huge proponent of Quad Radio, designing and helping out with the logo. They gave us banners. We've got stickers and everything. We're going to start and mail out this week, so a lot of cool things. And also, if you're going to be at the ATV Motocross Banquet this weekend, we'll have those on hand for you. But nonetheless, back here to Where Have All, or actually the State of the Sport Quad segment with Seth Fargher. Seth, again, man, like you said, man, we had some really interesting conversations over the course of the last month or so about the do's and don'ts of sponsorship. But there's so much about this industry that I think a lot of people don't even know or realize where it came from, the dues that have been paid over the years, the trials, the errors, the everything that goes along with it. And I think this is a good history lesson for the ATV racing enthusiasts, the ATV riding enthusiasts, because this crosses all lines here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's historical, and it was cool to me when my editor at ATV.com pitched the idea of doing this story. I was like, oh, that's fantastic, because it's something that I'm interested in as well. And so nothing better than an excuse to get a hold of some of the major manufacturers and ask questions. And I was curious about it, and until I was able to start actually working in the industry about 4 years ago, I was kind of reading through magazines, and it was funny. The first thought I had, and I actually had to write the article about 3 times because it was too long. Like I kept putting info in, and I'd talk to a manufacturer, and I wanted to tell like a time frame timeline article of the Sport Quad segment from the 90s until present day, but it was just turning out to be too long. And they said, if it's too long, nobody's going to read it. So I kept dumbing it down, and the final revision is what got published. And it's a better read than what I was doing, but it was just so fascinating to me to see the evolution of the Sport Quad segment, and how it's developed, and the history of it from mid to late 80s, the glory days, as a lot of people call it, of factory sponsorships, and the 250R days, and Suzuki came out with their Quad Racer 250, and that whole revolution that then went away, and then the whole hybrid thing that was going on, and then now where we're at. So I won't dive in just yet unless you're ready to talk about the whole history.
Well, we will. And first, I guess we could prelude this to the fact that the fact that we as an ATV community right now, especially if you're new to the community, are a spoiled community by comparison. If you look to what we had 10, 15, 20 years ago in the ATV racing industry, actually it was about 10 years ago that we started seeing that spark of re-life from the factories and so forth. And a good core of the racers and enthusiasts today probably don't realize or know what happened back before 2002. So I think, Seth, probably the best way and is to break it down kind of like what you got in your article here. Start right at the beginning, man. I mean, about the Sport ATV segment itself. I mean, how did it all get started? I mean, going back to it all, I would assume we're talking 80s, 70s, 80s, whenever we had the three-wheel division, and we had some things, and that kind of upset the whole industry and kind of gave a black eye to ATVing in general. But since then, you know, we've kind of climbed a lot of obstacles out there, and people realizing that four wheels aren't like what the three wheels are now, and it's made for better things, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the revolution really started in terms of sport ATVs. The three-wheeler days were going on, and my hat's off to all those guys. Jimmy White is one of them. I think Dean Sundell, the Gary Denton, those guys that raced three-wheelers and jumped them and did all that. My hat's off to those. They were a different breed of racer. And then Gary Denton showed up in 1985 with a hybrid version of them with the LT250R quad racer, and that started the sport quad revolution, so to speak. And then Honda, Kawasaki all followed. Yamaha came out with the Banshee in '87. And then all of a sudden you fast forward to about 92, and most of them went away. Honda stopped producing the 250R in '89. Kawasaki made the Takati 4 just for a few years. Suzuki held on longer than any of the 250R makers. They made it till 1992. I've actually got a mint 1991 Quad Racer 250R that was restored by Duncan Racing and featured in Dirt Wheels magazine about a year or two ago. And it's sitting in storage because it's so immaculate. I don't want to ride it. So that's kind of a mint ATV classic that I have. So it's pretty fun. And then we made it to the 90s, and there wasn't much by way of sport ATVs. There was Yamaha stuck with it. They had the Banshee, the Yamaha Warrior, and the Yamaha Blaster, and they continued production of those. And Honda had their 300EX as well. But other than that, there weren't really any sport ATVs in terms of racing. Your racing crowd was still rebuilding 250Rs, and they were expensive because you had to get a Roll Design or a Lone Star chassis, and all your A-arms and suspension and building motors and so forth. And so obviously you're still building motors and all that today, but everything then was custom. It was all aftermarket. There weren't any factory production bikes, and so the cost was astronomical. It was good for aftermarket manufacturers, but it was really difficult to build a race bike because you couldn't go to your dealer and pick something up as a platform. You had to start, buying a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 custom frame and go to work from there. So it was really different.
Yeah, and I guess a big question on a lot of folks' minds, the question that I have, and I think I know the answer to it, but I mean, so many people out there might not. What happened to the sport ATV quad industry, the sport ATV industry? I mean, why did it take a dive? Why did it disappear nearly? And most of the manufacturers basically pull up stakes on the idea.
I honestly think it was, and I didn't get to ask that because I focused so much on the newer, like where we're at now when I spoke to manufacturers, but I did hear overtones of the three-wheeler days, and I think the three-wheelers, unfortunately, the lawsuits, the chaos, the struggle with that, tightened everybody down a lot, and they feared the same kind of thing happening with ATVs, and so they backed up and had to pull out so as to save face and not have a recurrence of what went on with the three-wheelers. And unfortunately, I wish everyone could just kind of accept responsibility for their own actions, and if they hurt themselves, not blame the ATV or the three-wheeler. But unfortunately, the world that we live in, everyone's looking to point a finger at somebody else, and the manufacturers are the ones that take the blame. And so that's an unfortunate deal. But I think that's what led to the the demise of the factories in the late 80s and the pullout, which kind of created a desolate, I don't know the right word, but just a desolate playing field for the 90s, where there wasn't much in terms of sport quads. Like I said, you had the Banshee, the Blaster, the Warrior, and the 300EX for much of that time.
Wow. And like you say, it was very limited, and that's where the aftermarket companies, like you had mentioned, came in, and that virtually is what saved, I think, the ATV racing industry and probably sport ATVs in general, to be honest with you, because more likely we probably, I don't even know if they would have developed it so much, would have continued developing the, they would have, the utility ATVs, they would have continued to develop those, I would think, because those actually became a nice tool and everything. But still, you know, I mean, it was an idea that, you know, to do this and continue to do this. I'm sure it was tough on their part, but like I was trying to allude to there, the aftermarket companies stepped up. They stepped up with, like you said, they were building frames. They were taking these old motors. They were rebuilding those. They were building A-arms. They were building shocks. I mean, basically, virtually everything on an ATV was right from scratch. I mean, unless you happen to buy that. So I think a big pat on the back goes to the aftermarket industry, and so many of those have struggled over the last decade. But, you know, the last couple of years, Seth, I think we've seen a resurgence of the aftermarkets.
Yeah, really, there's new companies being founded, and it's obviously you have to kind of restructure your business where maybe you could focus on building A-arms and A-arms alone. Well, now the side-by-side industry is great, and if you want to stay in business, you've got to target that market. And I ended up talking about that in the article a little bit. I interviewed a couple business owners in the aftermarket world, just for their opinion on how it's changed and how they're one of those was Pro Armor. I talked to their manager, Fred Brayton, just about the evolution that they've seen and how they've been involved in building products. They're on factory race teams, and with the shift in popularity to side-by-sides, they're capitalizing on that in a big way, because really in this climate, if anyone wants to stay in business as an aftermarket manufacturer, you can't ignore that segment. You've got to participate in it, because it's really the only one that is growing with leaps and bounds. So he provided info on that, but at the same time, he said, we're not ignoring the sport market. He said that's what we did before the side-by-sides. That's what we're going to continue to do, and so we're not ignoring it. He shared they even released 3 products this year, new bumpers and spindle guards and that kind of thing. And so his mindset is we're not going to ignore that just because there's more money to be made somewhere else. He said we're going to continue to do research and development to develop our products to support that market, support that segment, and be involved in racing and be involved with consumers in the ATV market, because that's a big deal for them, and they don't want to ignore it.
For sure. And you know, moving ahead to as the early days of ATV racing, you know, we start with the hybrid stuff basically, and we work through all that. Now, during that time, was there any? Well, I guess we started factory stuff and then went back to the whatever at one point. I mean, it cycled so many times it's hard to remember. But what do you think got these guys back into the idea of getting back into the sport ATV market? Because I know I look, and I think if memory serves me correct, Honda was one of the first. And, of course, Honda, it kind of makes sense because everyone was already using Honda motors, so Honda had a good stronghold in the ATV racing community. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, I remember reading long before I met Jeremiah Jones and a lot of these top people. I remember reading articles where people would swear in a lot of magazine reviews that the 1988 Honda 250R was the best sport ATV ever made. And with the 250R being a platform for pretty much all the custom race bikes, Honda no doubt has a history of building quality products. And I remember the day that I saw the first advertisement for the Honda TRX 400EX. I was looking through a magazine in probably 1998, and I'm dating myself there because, man, I was young back then. But I remember opening the page, and it was a picture of the frame engine area of an XR 400 dirt bike, and it just said we took one of our most powerful, reliable engines, and it was the engine area, but the engine was gone. You turn the page, and there was a picture of the 400EX, and it says, and put 4 wheels on it, or something like that. And I was like, I remember being shocked and being pumped on the fact that, wow, a manufacturer is getting back in the game and building a new sport quad. And so the Honda 400EX, in my mind, and what I really kind of found as I did research for this article, is what kind of started that sport ATV revolution. Obviously, it wasn't a great racer, although people did use it in Baja. They raced the Baja 1000. You'd see guys, if you followed the Huevos Grandes movies, you saw a lot of them back in those days being jumped and that kind of thing. But for racing, they weren't a great platform, as they were pretty heavy, kind of down on power, didn't handle all the greatest. But it's definitely what started the surge, and the following years is when you started seeing all the other manufacturers get involved, like Kawasaki and Suzuki with the Z400, which was monumental in its own right, because that's what sparked the return of production-based race bikes. I don't know if you remember Tim Farr and Jeremiah Jones and Doug Gus were all racing production Z400s back in the day, and I spoke with Mark Baldwin for this article as well, and he was working with Tim Farr on that bike, and there was one year in there where Tim signed with Suzuki, and they were racing Z400s, and that was when there was still an open or unlimited class, pro class, but then that was the pro production class was born, and you had to be on a production bike, and it was pretty much the Suzuki Z400 or the Kawasaki KFX 400, which was pretty much an identical bike.
Right, and I remember that. I remember those days, and whenever the production bikes started coming in, and the production classes, which I think was a great platform to introduce those and kind of ease them into the racing industry. And I got to ask you, now with that, I know the reason that we went 4-stroke was because of a lot of concerns with emissions and things like that. But I got to ask you, Seth, do you feel that maybe the revolution of the 4-stroke motor has been another boost in the arm for the ATV industry?
I think so. I mean, the technological advances in 4-strokes have been amazing. I mean, while the ATV industry was on hold, obviously you saw all the major manufacturers, like you say, the big four, Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Yamaha, their development of the 4-stroke technology, whereas Yamaha came out with the YZF 400 as a 4-stroke dirt bike, and then which was groundbreaking and monumental as a motocross bike, and then the 426, which I remember reading about. Jimmy Button was racing for Chaparral, and I read an article where he said it was scary fast getting on the 426, and it's funny to look back now at where production 450 bikes are at, and the factory bikes that James Stewart and Ryan Dungey and Ryan Villapoto are racing. They'd probably get on that old 426 and be like, this thing feels like a mini bike. But that was where the development was going on, and so they were really developing 4-stroke technology and how to get horsepower out of it that just superseded the 2-strokes. And so if 2-stroke performance had been, had they continued the development of it right alongside of 4-strokes, would a modern-day 2-stroke be as powerful and stuff? Possibly, but like you say, with emissions and the technology just began to shift towards 4-stroke performance. 4-strokes are certainly more reliable than 2-strokes. I can understand that was a factor. They're certainly more expensive to do a top end and a rebuild on a 4-stroke, but they hold up a lot longer. You remember the 2-stroke days, and I've ridden plenty of 2-strokes, and I've put my fair share of top ends and burnt pistons up and everything else because they require more maintenance. And so I think that's a lot of why we saw the shift to 4-strokes, and now the comparison between a YZ250 dirt bike and a YZ450F 4-stroke is night and day.
Right. And really, if you look at it now, are there any other than the, what is that, the Raptors, I think, are they still producing those? Those are still 2-strokes, right? Are there very many 2-stroke quads still in production today?
Actually, the Raptor is a 4-stroke. There is Yamaha was the last one, to my knowledge, with the Yamaha Banshee, and they quit that 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't even get that info, but the Blaster, the Yamaha Blaster, and the Yamaha Banshee were the longest, or the last production two-strokes, to my knowledge. I know Polaris had their Scrambler for a little while, but I believe those are the last remaining production two-stroke ATVs. And to my knowledge, you can still buy Yamaha Banshees in Canada. I guess their emissions are a little bit less stricter than ours, so you can still. I ran into some Canadian folks down at the Oregon Dunes a year or so ago, and they were talking about how you can still buy Banshees off the showroom floor, and some people go to Canada to buy it and bring it back to the States. So, but yeah, that's everything. Everything in production nowadays is pretty much four-stroke.
And, of course, all the work of the aftermarket manufacturers and the OEMs eventually getting back into it, it all culminated into moving ahead and moving forward in the early 2000s. It all started, I guess, there in the late 90s, but the early 2000s really began to build the platform for what you have titled the golden years of, I guess, the OEM portion of our ATV racing community.
Yeah, absolutely. After Suzuki and Kawasaki came out with that, it kind of breathed new life into the racing community for sure, and launched the return of factory racing, and all the manufacturers began getting on board between 2004 and 2008. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, Can-Am, KTM, and Polaris were all putting together race programs and developing 450cc machines, and that's really why it was the golden years. Because, and I quoted in the story at one point, there was factory race programs racing in some national series around the country from all 7 manufacturers. Polaris had Doug Eichner out racing Works. Can-Am was involved in the National Motocross as well as Works. They had a huge Works program, which they still do. Yamaha was backing people at both levels, as they still are. Kawasaki had Chad Wienen way back in those days. Chad was racing for Kawasaki at the national level, and he did some Works races. And then, it was just KTM was working with in the GNCC. They were really big in the GNCC, and so you were seeing just different manufacturers get in the game and get involved in sport racing as well as the recreational aspect.
And it was good, man. I mean, it was real good. People were making big money. The racing, the numbers at the races, I'm sure the numbers out on the trails on the weekends, whenever you just went riding on the weekends and stuff, there were a lot of people out, and I think a lot of that has to do with the financial situation, because about, what was it, 2008 or so, man, we really we hit a big wall as far as the racing, well, as a nation, I guess, and the racing community. I think we might have started recognizing it a little bit before it started happening, but by about 2008 or so, man, things really started to level out. And it started getting a little bit tougher, I guess, to race from a financial standpoint. And at this point, this, I think, is a good place for the aftermarkets to step back in, because you take these 4 or 5 year old ATVs, and the average Joe like myself that doesn't, maybe have the money that a lot of people do to sink into it, can once again afford to ride.
Absolutely, yeah. It on some sense, it leveled the playing field. For a while there, it seemed like anybody was getting a factory ride, and I'd say quote unquote factory. They were at least getting free bikes and then maybe a parts budget. So the pro class is great. It's great for lots of people to step up. For the amateurs, it definitely gives you a great number to shoot for. But everyone was running with that. Whereas now, it somewhat levels the playing field to where people are buying aftermarket products and rebuilding bikes that are 4 or 5 years old. I know a lot of people that swear by the 05 Honda TRX 450, and so they're buying up old bikes and rebuilding them and refurbishing them every year. And after every race, to be able to race that older specific bike. And so yeah, the 2008 financial crush really dealt a blow to the economy, which translated down to the sport ATV segment. And whereas 2008 was kind of the golden year, 2009 we saw a different climate. I got a correspondence from a gentleman at KTM, John Hines, who said that was just a struggle for them, and that's why they pulled their program after that. They stay involved with Tim Farr and the GNCC racing scene for a little while, but they kind of overall had to step back because unit sales weren't happening, and for them, the KTM was a fantastic machine, but it was just higher priced than everything else. And so, and we saw that with Polaris. Polaris stopped production of their Outlaw 450 and 525 machines, and just began to see people kind of stepping back because of the financial times, and unfortunately, the manufacturers had to do so. And specifically, I got a real good opportunity to talk to several of the OEMs from just the behind-the-scenes stuff, because really, and what continues to fascinate me, I'm a sport quad guy. I love the racing scene, and that's awesome to me, and that's what's covered in the magazines. In all reality, the sports segment is such a small piece of the pie when you figure in side-by-sides and utility quads. And Steve Nessel at Yamaha, I spoke with him and Van Holmes, two of their product marketing guys, and what they really said is what you have to remember, that even during the lulls of the 90s, where sport quads were few and far between, the utility segment was continuing to grow. And even during the boom years, the sport quads shot up like astronomically. The utility quads shot up astronomically. And so the mindset of a lot of consumers out there, they say they have a ranch or a farm, they need to buy a quad. They can buy a utility quad that's going to serve them purpose on their ranch for a work bike. And yeah, every once in a while, if once a month they want to go play on it on the trails, they can go do that with a utility quad. Whereas a sport ATV, it'll be good for going and playing once a month, but that's about it. It's single purpose. Whereas they can't tow a trailer, they can't haul hay or feed or whatever. And so that opened my eyes to that, and it makes sense. And so they explained to me why so much of the R&D, even with the bikes now, we're very blessed. Like you said, as bad as some people think it is, we're way better off than we were in the 90s. We have 4 450cc class sport machines in production, but they're not receiving updates every year like they used to and like we'd like to see. The guys I spoke with said that's largely because the utility market continues to grow and continues to be fairly healthy in this market, and so most of the R&D goes into the utility machines, simply for the reason that that's where the market is. And you see that with side-by-sides, too, as that market is just exploding.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's astronomical. I mean, not like you say, they're just so versatile. I mean, you can use them for fun, you can use them for work, and people do, and you can race them. That's another cool thing about it.
Yeah,
it's funny how if you put a motor on it, man, people try to race it. Lawnmower racing was one of the funniest things for me.
I went back home to Oregon and drove up to my grandma's house, and I drove past the fully sanctioned lawnmower racing course out in the field, and I was like, when did they put that in? I said, oh boy, it's getting popular around here.
That's crazy. But yeah, I mean, put a motor on it and try to race it. And I guess that's the whole idea behind the advancements that we're seeing, like you mentioned, in the utility division. I mean, with Can-Am, I mean, they're marketing a lot of their machines from a working and a fun racing standpoint as well. I mean, I think they do a good job with that as well. And I think one thing that they've got a niche in the market on over everybody else, even though, their machines may be a little more expensive, they've got that one product that they're facing on, or that one type of product, the utility type stuff. I mean, they got the sport quad, but they've also, most everything is based around the utility / trail riding fun of it all.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty awesome. They've got a setup with their Renegade, which they call I spoke to Chaz Rice with BRP, and he was a wealth of information, and they've got that as a rec sport. I mean, and it's offered in 3 configurations: a 500, an 800, and a 1,000 cc. I got to check my sources. I believe it's 500. It may be 400. But regardless, it's various configurations to give people the same experience, the opportunity to go out there and ride at different price points, which is huge. And by the same token, you know, they have their Outlander 1000 utility quad. Now, yeah, it's got racks on it, and it's a big, bulkier bike. But I rode one last year on an event that I did with them. It doesn't. I mean, yeah, it doesn't handle like a sport quad, but it's 1,000 cc's, and it may weigh a lot more than a sport quad. It's 1,000 cc's,
exactly.
And I took off. I was actually chasing Jared Kelly, who used to work at ATV Sport. He now works for Can-Am. He took off on one of them, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, you don't ride utility quads like you ride sport quads. But he was on one, and he took off like a crazy, and so I was like, well, shoot. If he's going to, I'm going to. And I chased him down, and I've never had so much fun on a utility quad. And sure, you got to be mindful of it because they don't turn.
Right.
And there was one point in time the trail turned, and I had too much momentum going, and they don't stop on a dime, and I may or may not have hit a tree. But it was fun, and I mean they've got independent suspension. You know, they've got their disco lock. Transmission differential system. I don't know all the technical stuff because I haven't researched the utility quads, but I got on it and pushed the throttle, and it was a blast. And so, you know, you definitely see a lot of the utility crowd gravitating towards that, and a lot of the R&D by the manufacturers.
That's pretty neat the way they do it from a racing standpoint as much as they do, I think, a work standpoint. But, yeah, I have to agree that that Can-Am machine is a pretty good thing. And with all this, I mean, we're looking at the future or the present right now, and I think we can all pretty much feel where we're at right now. But I don't think people – well, I think maybe they do see the writing on the wall because it's been happening over the last 3 or 4 years, and, you know, still a lot of questions remain about what kind of involvement it's going to be with factories next year. And from what I'm understanding – from a pro level, things are stepping back, but from an amateur level, they're stepping up from a contingency program and a lot of those programs and stuff. But I guess a big question that I have, and especially since you talk to these people, you probably have a pretty good idea of what they're sensing the market to be like. What does the future hold for us, Seth? I mean, right now, here we are. It's good. And, you know, like I said, some of the support from the major manufacturers are kind of they're spreading it out a little differently than what they have in years past. It's good, but at the same time, you know, from an outsider looking in, if you don't know all the details, it could be kind of frightening in a way.
Yeah, definitely. What's really unique is that every manufacturer kind of has their own perspective, and you can kind of tell what their perspective is on it by their involvement. You look at Polaris, who kind of pulled out of the sport ATVs. Well, they've got a uberly successful side-by-side program. So for them, the future is kind of geared towards side-by-sides. And then you flip over to Yamaha, who has a tremendous lineup of sport ATVs right now, and they're not just you know, reproducing the same model. They're increasing it. They redid the YFC 450 in 2009. Made their 450R with a new frame and fuel injection, and that's the model that Chad is racing now and winning on. And they have, beyond that, they have the Raptor, the 2013 Yamaha Raptor, which actually I went to a press intro for back in May, and they have 3 models. They have the Raptor 700, the Raptor 700R, and then the 700 Special Edition. And all 3 models actually decreased in price over last year. They were able to get rid of some goodies. They were able to change some stuff on them. But the consumer is cost-conscious, so they wanted to offer the same bike. They were actually to improve the machine, make some adjustments to improve it while cutting the cost, which was huge. And so that shows their dedication to it, as well as they've got smaller bikes. They've got a Raptor 125, a Raptor 250, the Raptor 350, which was formerly the Warrior. But they've got several models, and it's fantastic to see. I'm a little jealous because kids nowadays have much more to choose from than kids when I was growing up. I didn't have a quad with suspension on it until I was like 13 or 14 years old. And now you've got so many different models out there for kids, and for those they call it the 12U segment, the not quite 16, but you're bigger than a youth mini 50, 60, 90 rider. So like the 125, the 250, those are great bikes, and they're involved. And so you've got Polaris on one side who's focusing on another market completely. You've got Yamaha, who's still very dedicated to the sports segment, and then you've got some other ones in the middle, like Honda continues to produce the TRX 450. They haven't really made any adjustments or updates to it, which is unfortunate. But the fact that they're producing it where some manufacturers aren't shows that they still see value in that segment, which is good for us. We'd like to go back to 2008, 2007, 2008, where every year there's new updates, there's brand new equipment and all kinds of stuff. But unfortunately, we're not there. But at least they're still producing bikes, which is good. We haven't gone back to the lull of the 1990s, and so you can. And answer the long answer to that question is you kind of can see the manufacturer's perspective on that segment by how involved they are. And if they've got something elsewhere, like KTM, they're dumping a lot of money into their off-road dirt bike program. They hired Roger DeCoster, and they've got Dungey, and that costs a lot of money. And so it's paying off. They're winning races and won the championship. But unfortunately for us, that means the ATV segment part of it suffers. But you can see from the different manufacturers, Yamaha, Honda, BRP continues to have an unmatched contingency program where they're paying out big bucks to racers from amateur classes at local series to amateur and professional racers at the big series. And that was something that they opened my eyes to, that I was aware of, but not fully aware of how big their contingency program is as a means of supporting the sport and rewarding people for getting on a Can-Am.
Yeah, and with Can-Am, they, just to point out, they focus on mini quads. I mean, I think they've got a 70 and a 90, possibly at least a 90, I know. And I know that the folks at Yamaha have really been pushing some youth ATVs, especially on the GNCC side of things. So it's good to see that, they see some positives in the future of that, of the sport ATVs itself. So that's good that they're keeping in that. And I think it's really neat that you brought up a point. I think it might be something that might really help save the manufacturers. Whenever you brought up the fact that, like Polaris, they're kind of backing down a little bit on the sport ATV side and pushing the side-by-side end of it, that kind of opens the door a little bit more, I think. I mean, I know there's still some sport ATV Polaris out there, but their focus is, like you said, on side-by-sides. And Yamaha has got a phenomenal side-by-side in the Rhino, and I don't know how much R&D they're doing on that as far as the racing end of it and things of that nature, but I do know that they are continually R&Ding the ATVs from the little guys, from those little guys all the way up. I mean, the little bikes all the way up to the 450s that they're racing out there every week.
Yeah, they stress their commitment to the sports segment and to the racing community, and that shows that they're working with Chad and factory racing, and it was something that they kind of pointed out. Quote unquote factory racing. There's not really a lot of factory racing. Can-Am is probably the closest thing to a true factory race program. They've got John and Joel, and then they've got Josh Fredericks and some guys racing out in the Work Series, and they're running a factory supported program. Whereas some of the other guys like Chad and Thomas are backed by a factory, but they're kind of like satellite teams, factory-supported satellite teams, and so we talked about that a little bit. But the biggest thing is and for young people that weren't around or weren't racing back in the 90s, and it kind of goes back to like what we were talking about before we got on the air about our expectations get so high, we get used to something, and then all of a sudden it's not there, we get upset. But in reality, even with the fewer factory involvements, very few people making money from racing an ATV. It's a far cry from where it was in the 90s, because at least there are factory involvement or satellite support to be had. There is some of that, and there are sport quad machines in production, and that alone is it's not what it was 5 years ago, but it's a far cry from where it was back in the 90s.
That's good. That's good. And I guess basically we can really be positive about the ATV, the sport ATV segment right now because, like we say, Yamaha and the DS450 from Can-Am and their DS lineup with the youth ATVs and stuff. I mean, I think that shows a commitment, and they're continually R&Ding like Yamaha. I'm hearing rumors, and I don't know, maybe you can confirm this, but it really seems like, and I'm hearing that Honda is about to start to show a little bit more support. Last year in the GNCC, I know we had the Honda factory involvement with Brian Wolf and Tim Farr's team, obviously, and those guys, and that's good. Another thing that we saw was, and I know this isn't related to the four-wheel and the sport ATVs, but another thing that I saw with Honda was that they're supporting, and they haven't done this in years, actually supporting riders with bikes, parts, allowances, and a little salary from what I'm understanding as well. And that's something that is showing a positive light in the racing community in general. I just got to wonder, is that a positive light from the sport quad segment of their divisions? Because if they're looking at throwing some support, and I'm hearing that there's possibility of even more support going down this year. I mean, there's talk of Chris Borge possibly racing a Honda this year, and of course he's also talking about racing a Yamaha, so that's still kind of up in the air. But I mean, is that not some positive things for us to take from the other manufacturers? I mean, we know that Yamaha and Can-Am are committed to the sporting end of it. We know that Honda, like you said, kind of rides that, I don't know if you said ride the fence, but they're kind of in the middle there where they are producing it, but they aren't necessarily promoting it and things of that nature. I mean, should we take a positive light out of this? I even heard, and you might know more about this than I do, that Suzuki has started producing again the race machines. Is that true? And like I said, are these all positive signs for what the future holds?
Yeah, I think absolutely. That was one. I traded emails with someone from Suzuki, and I wasn't able to put together an interview. And that's something as an enthusiast that I want to know as well. They're showing an involvement and a commitment to the sports segment because they still produce the Z400, which is good. We'd love to see the LTR 450 come back, but unfortunately they had some emissions trouble, and thankfully just settled a lawsuit with that. And hopefully we'll see the return of them to sport ATVs in a big way. That's what I'm hoping for and crossing my fingers for, because they certainly came on strong. But I think absolutely, by and large, it is positive. I know I wasn't able to get any details or specifics from Honda, but I know from my time out in California when I was living out there, I worked with Wayne Matlock a little bit in their desert program, and I went down to Baja twice with them, fortunately, which was an incredible experience. If you ever get the chance to go to the Baja 1000, go, because it's an unforgettable experience. But if you follow that at all, you would notice in the last couple of years they went from racing the 700XX back to the Honda 450R. And the knowledge I gained from that was they weren't receiving support from Honda during the years that they were racing the 700XX, and today they are getting some support. They're getting some factory support. I don't know if they're getting money, but I know they're getting bikes at least. And so I think that shows their commitment to Honda's commitment to growing the sport and getting involved in racing. And again, don't quote me on that, but my understanding was they weren't getting support from Honda at that time, so they were racing the 700XX because it was a good platform. Whereas now they are getting some support from Honda. And the conversation I had with Honda is that because the 450R is obviously still in production, that's the bike they want. They want him to go out and win on, so that people can see that, and then therefore sell units of the TRX 450. So they went from that to now Honda is back involved with their desert program. Unfortunately, they didn't win the 1000. It was actually a big win for Can-Am. Won the Motorworks DWT Can-Am team won the Baja 1000 this year. So props to Josh Frederick and those guys. That was a big win for them. and for Can-Am. I don't think they've won it since their DS650 days a long time ago. But, yeah, I digress. I digress into desert racing, which is a different topic. But, yeah, absolutely. The segment's good. There's lots of manufacturers getting involved, and I think it's just about structuring, whereas in the early 2000s, everyone jumped in and was throwing money at it, and there was a factory cast Kawasaki team with Chad Wienen and Josh Creamer, and then there was the Suzuki guys with Wimmer and Gust and Jeremiah, and all of a sudden everything stopped. Instead of just pulling back, everyone pulled out, and now they're restructuring and figuring out, kind of like Yamaha, okay, well, we're not going to field a factory team, but we'll do some satellite teams with Chad and Thomas, and Honda coming back in saying, we'll do some support with some guys at the GNCC level or with Matlock out in Desert. And so they're testing the waters to figure out what works instead of just jumping in and fielding a factory program where you have to have salaried mechanics and a salaried race team manager and all that kind of stuff. They're figuring out what works and how they can take some baby steps to get involved. So I think the future will look good.
I think so too, and I think in closing right here would probably be a pretty good place. I've been a big proponent of this for a while now, and I've been preaching it a lot. And some people, it falls on deaf ears a lot. But the one thing that we've got to remember, and I think Yamaha's got a grasp on it. I think Honda's getting a grasp on it, and even Can-Am. We saw them with all their satellite programs that they've got going on now. I think they're starting to see, or we're starting to see a big picture of what should actually be going on right now. If you take by comparison, any other type of sport, even the motocross, the two-wheel side of it is starting to lean toward this. You don't have a lot of the major factory teams only. It's all satellite-supported type stuff, and that's kind of a model, and I hate to throw it out there, but NASCAR. I mean, think about the aspect of this, and correct me if I am wrong, Seth, but I don't think that Chevy, I don't think that Dodge, I don't think that any of the manufacturers, car manufacturers right off the top of Ford or any of these guys, they actually support any of those NASCAR teams. They are not the backbone of what's going on out there in the pits. Those teams run those machines, and I'm sure they receive some compensation from it, but that is not the backbone of their team, and that's what we need to get away from in a mindset as an ATV racing community on the racing aspect of it, that we've got to broaden our horizons a little bit. We've got to start marketing ourselves and doing it outside of the industry, because the industry is so tapped right now. They're doing everything that they can to support it, and we just need to be creative as a racing community and start promoting ourselves and start bringing in that outside sponsorship. It's starting to happen a little at a time. It's tough. A lot of us don't know how to do it, but that's a road that we need to turn on.
I couldn't agree more. Maybe that'll be our next radio segment. We can talk about, just because you're absolutely right. Dodge, Toyota, Chevrolet aren't the ones spending the money on those cars to put, Jeff Gordon and Dale Jr. and all those guys on the track. It's Tide and M&M Mars Company and Anheuser-Busch. Those are the people, and along with a lot of others, that are putting up the money. And it's outside sponsors. And so that's kind of the direction we need to see the industry go, is outside sponsors. Because, yeah, you're right. The manufacturers are doing all that they can, but they can't afford it. And it's really outside advertising dollars, and what brings in the outside advertising dollars is an audience, is television, is that kind of stuff. And so we as a community need to work to promote it, to build it up and make it big, and create a demand for it to capture the eyes of outside financiers, if you will. And, there are people out there that have money, and they just like to race. I had a conversation with a guy recently that does not top fuel drag racing, but it's one of the drag racing series around the country. And he said a lot of the people that go to those races, they just are wealthy people that like racing. Yep. And we need some of those to come in and field teams, and there are some of those in the industry that are helping. They just have been successful, and they like the sport, and so they're going to give back. But we also need to build a demand and the audience with outside companies to get them to come in, Skoal tobacco, beer, those people support like bull riding, for instance. Obviously, there's none of their products are on the bull or what have you. So it's just it's advertising, and that's just how advertising works. And we need to really bring those types of companies. I'm not. I should have picked different ones than beer and tobacco, but I'm just using those. I had bull riding come to mind, and those are popular ones. But,
right.
That's what we need to do.
There's another classic example, too. The bulls aren't what supports bull riding. They aren't the bull manufacturers. The farmers aren't the ones that's supporting bull riding.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If the farmers had to provide 10 bulls and $1 million, they wouldn't be in business.
Right. That's it. So I guess that's probably about as simple a way I've ever looked at it as any, man. I mean, that was an enlightenment for me right there. So
Nice.
Nice. Well, Seth, I tell you, man, I know you got to go, and you've got things in this holiday week, and are going to be, I'm sure, visiting family and having lots of dinner and everything. But again, I just want to say thanks to you for taking the time today to visit with us and give us an overview of the state of the sport quad segment. I honestly, I think what we can take away from this, as negative as it may have appeared and appears at times, I think there are a lot more positives out there than negatives right now.
Yeah, I think so. You have to put it in perspective. And, yeah, if you look at it compared to 5 years ago, we're not in as good a shape. But if you look at it where we were, 15, 20 years ago, we're very blessed. And so it's a good lesson, to look at for the industry, and it's a good lesson for us to look at for our own lives and say, look, things aren't how we want it, but, man, they're good. Life is good, and you're blessed if you've got a place to go and have Thanksgiving dinner this week. You're a lot better off than the vast majority of the people on the planet. So, being truly appreciative for where we're at in the sport, we're in a good place for sure.
That we are, for sure. And Seth, again, just thanks for your time today, and I want to say thanks to our friends at Impact Solutions, ATV.com as well, Factory Authorized Service Center for Elko Suspension over there on Harris Highway in Parkersburg, West Virginia. 304-863-0025 is the number you want to dial there. Also, our friends at SSI Decals, thanks to Ian and all those guys out there for making Quad Radio look so cool and help us get things out there. Seth, any parting shots before we let you go today?
No, that's it. Feel free, as always, to email questions or comments. I like talking to people. I like answering questions and being as involved as I can. So Seth at SethFargher.com. Always welcome to shoot an email, and maybe we'll talk about it on some other episode of Quad Radio.
All righty. Sounds good, brother. I appreciate the time. And don't forget to like Quad Radio on the web as well. We've got the Facebook page over there, something we haven't pushed a whole lot on, but we've got pushing close to 600 likes on there now. And I'd like to reach 1,000 or so by the next week or so. So get out there and let your friends know that they need to like Quad Radio. And don't forget to let them know they need to listen to this particular segment of Quad Radio as well. It's the State of the Sport Quad segment with Seth Fargher. For Seth Fargher, I'm Rodney Tomlin. This is Quad Radio.